Tim Cook says it's 7 o'clock Eastern.
Okay, welcome. You got 14 people attending the conference. I would appreciate any questions, put it in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat and then refer to Dr. Lane when it's appropriate. So welcome to the autoethnography webinar. Dr. Jim Lane will share his knowledge and experiences using this method. We're going to follow with a Q&A. He will introduce the autoethnography design as used within dissertations. It's all yours, Dr. Lane.
All right, well, thank you, Armando, and welcome everybody. And this is the second annual webinar for autoethnography. And for those of you who appreciate symmetry and parallel structure, our presentation last year was August 23rd. So that's pretty good, I think, just within a day. So welcome. This is a conversation about autoethnography, and so we'll tell you what that means. First thoughts. You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read, only if we face these open wounds in ourselves can we understand them in other people. Pardon me. One writes out of one thing only, one's own experience. Everything depends on how relentlessly one forces from this experience the last drop, sweet or bitter, it can possibly give. And these are from James Baldwin. And I always like to start with the literary piece because, as we'll see, autoethnography is art form as much as it is other forms of research. So I just feel like these comments from James Baldwin really capture the essence of autoethnography. Here's an overview of our presentation. As I said, this is it's not exactly a reprise of last year's presentation. When I looked at the stuff from last year, I thought, well, there's a lot of good material there, but we didn't want to do the same thing. So you'll see that, and I think the last presentation is available on the research methodology website, so people can access it there, or I can send it to you if you need it. There's a lot of good information there. Some of the material has remained because it's a pretty good baseline, and much has changed. The focus here is going to be more personal because I've been honored and had the opportunity and taken the initiative to go to quite a few conferences over the last several years. And so there are people who have really, that I've met, that I've heard, that I've kind of worked with, that really made an impact on me and an impression. And you know, you can read about people and read, you know, their research when you're writing. You know, I read a lot of these people for my dissertation. But when you see them and you meet them and you talk with them and you correspond with them, that really changes. It's really a game changer. So that's more of what this is going to be. We're going to start with the methodological, conceptual, ethical overview. I call that learning from the masters. And I'm going to be kind of quick on that because some of it may be a bit redundant. Some of it we said before. And you can look it up if you need to, if you want to, or we can talk later. The next section I call hearing from the masters. And I have some pieces that really have stayed with me. Some that I heard several years ago, some that I've heard as recently as May at a conference. And so I just felt like it was an opportunity to share those. And I'll read them. I'll have them on the screen and point out what I think is interesting and unique. I've got some personal applications if we have time. We should note that autoethnography is not an authorized methodology for UOP dissertations. And I'm okay with that because, you know, it can be all over the charts. And I would agree that, you know, research methodology maybe for a doc student can be better taught through other methodologies. However, once you have your doctorate, it certainly is an accepted methodology for publishing in quite a few journals. So with that, Baldwin says, you write in order to change the world. If you alter, even by a millimeter, the way people look at reality, then you can change it. And that really is, changing the world by a millimeter is kind of one of the essences of autoethnography, as we will see. So, you know, all of these webinars I think that we've done today have asked this question, why do you want to do it? Is this right for you? Is this appropriate? So here are these questions. Why would you do it? Well, if you're interested in critiquing issues in society, if you want to make contributions, extend existing research and theory, uh, vulnerability, if you're as a way to understand emotions and improve social life, and you may not be comfortable with that. And if you're not comfortable with that, not for you. Um, this has become increasingly significant in autoethnographic communities, disrupting taboos, breaking silences, reclaim lost and disregarded voices. So it's really maybe kind of on the edge. I don't think it has to be, but a lot of it is, and we'll talk through that. And then to make research accessible to multiple audiences. And these researchers are Adams, Jones, and Ellis. That's Tony Adams, Stacy Jones, and Carolyn Ellis. And Carolyn Ellis is kind of the I don't know, the founder, grandmother of autoethnography, has written just piles of stuff. So she really is the kind of the resident expert. Tony Adams and Stacy Jones are actually her students, were her students. And it's interesting, she's got several, she and her husband, Art Bachner, have quite a few students of theirs who have gone off and become experts in autoethnography and widely published. And Tony Adams and Stacy Jones are two of those. And so they're quoted throughout her quite a bit. This is a definition from last time, but it is kind of the basic definition from Carolyn Ellis. What is it? Graphy, describe and systematically analyze personal experiences in order to understand cultural experience. So that's autoethnography per Carolyn Ellis. Convention. This is from Norm Denson. And Norm Denson, again, is kind of I don't know what the right word is. I've used grandfather, pioneer, patriarch of qualitative inquiry. And he is the coordinator, the founder of the International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry at University of Illinois, where he's professor emeritus. And I think they've just finished the 15th annual Congress. And it really is a focal point, a center for qualitative research. And Denson has increasingly, seems to be embraced autoethnography, and especially evocative autoethnography and performative autoethnography, which we will talk about. So Denson has really become a major spokesman for autoethnography. So what are the conventions, according to Norm Denson? The existence of others, it involves other people. Increasingly for this group, the focus on race, gender, and class. Family beginnings, family origins, family experiences are increasingly significant. We know the authors, we know the observers. Life markers, clear objective life markers are always part of autoethnography. Real people with real lives, turning point experiences, epiphanies, insights, these are always key factors in autoethnography. And he says truthful statements distinguish from fictions. And there can be fiction in autoethnography, but it's fiction to actually to present broader truths. As a method, again, using a researcher's personal experience to describe and critique cultural beliefs, practices, experiences. It's all about honesty. It's all about transparency, acknowledging and valuing your relationship with other people, because you're talking about experiences that you've had with other people, and that has shaped your insights into whatever larger issue we're talking about. Deep and careful self-reflection, reflexivity, is paramount in autoethnography. And always, as I say, interrogating the intersections between self and society. This intersectionality, again, is increasingly emphasized in my experience with autoethnography, the particular and the general, the personal and the political. And you'll see examples of that pretty quickly, I think. Showing people on the process of figuring out what to do, how to live, the meaning of their struggles, and balancing intellectual methodological rigor and striving for social justice, often for social justice. recognize the limits of knowledge. Storytelling and narrative are paramount in autoethnography, and focusing on the ethical implications of their work with their participants, and we'll look at that. I know I'm going quickly, but I want to get to some other things. Priorities, always personal experience, always reflexivity, often looking insider knowledge of a cultural phenomenon or experience, and that for me is the key. You know, I'm not necessarily interested in being all expressive and evocative, but I am interested in examining cultural phenomena and you know, in how I can use my experiences and my whatever insights I have to frame that. In my case, I was a middle school principal, so I go a lot to that. But then, as we'll see, there are expansions from our immediate experience. So, critiquing cultural norms, experiences, practices, and a lot of times seeking responses from audiences. From that's more for performative. Sorry. So this is from a woman named Sophie Tamas, who again was a kind of a well-published, widely published author in autoethnography. I attended a workshop that she presented last year, actually in May, I guess, at ICQI, is the International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry, University of Illinois. And these were some comments that she had made. Always include transparency, as I will try to do here. Avoid narcissism. And I think, and be insightful but not didactic. And this is why, you know, I can understand why we don't want these for dissertations, because it's pretty easy to be narcissistic, solipsistic. You know, it's all about me. And it is about you, but it's not about you. Pardon me. Excuse me. I'm going to have to break just a second. Excuse me. Anyway, insightful, but not, and I don't know what the difference, there's a line between showing insight and being didactic and in terms of preaching and telling people what's right and wrong. And, you know, I guess we have to decide that for ourselves. Autoethnography can be didactic. And so that's just one of the cautions by Tamas, and I agree with that, of course. So this is from Norm Dinson. Here are criticisms of autoethnography, which we'll see clearly. Non-analytic, self-indulgent, irreverent, sentimental, romantic, too artful, not artful enough, not being scientific, no theory, no concepts, no hypothesis, not sufficiently rigorous, lacking reliability, generalizability, validity, too little field work, small samples, biased data, navel-gazers, too self-absorbed, offering only verisimilitude, not analytic insights. So to follow that, this is from Robin Boylorn and Mark Orby. I don't know Orby, but I have seen Robin Boylorn at several events, heard her, talked to her, have an autographed book by her. And she is an African-American woman, and I don't know, not so old. I'd say she's less than 40. She's really done very well for herself. She's at the University of Alabama, professor in communications, and most of these are, by the way, in communications. And she writes about the experience of being an African-American woman, and she writes a lot about gender and stereotypes and race and poverty and that sort of thing. So, and we have an example written by her in just a minute. But she says she agrees that a limitation is that it focuses on independent experiences and sometimes at the expense of larger cultural issues. So they're not abandoning that in favor of a method of phenomenology, focus groups, traditional ethnography. So I thought that was good. That, you know, it's not the be all and end all. It's just a tool. It's just another look. So Dinson responds to all of this by saying, autoethnography cannot be judged by traditional positivistic criteria. The goal is not to produce a standard social science article. The goal is to write performance texts in a way that moves others to ethical action. And so you can see this is where Dinson is going, is really on the social justice critique, pretty far left on the spectrum. Different types, individual, they can collaborative, work with other people. Um, Often evocative, um, interpretive, performative, critical, a lot of performance in autoethnography. That's not what I'm doing, but some people do. Critical is in social critique. Analytic is key, and I'm really more on the analytical frame, um, but many of these are not. So it's whatever you really. I think it's a broad tent. So I think whatever one is comfortable with, uh, there's a room for you. Um, for critique, um, again, here's a quote by Robin Boylorn and Mark Orby. Identities are best understood through explorations of intersectionality, the cultural synergy created through interactions of race, ethnicity, gender, sex, socioeconomic status, sexuality, nationality, age, spirituality, and or abilities. That pretty much covers it. So that's a focus for her and a focus for many of these people. Evocative, really evocative kind of covers all of these things, often embracing subjectivity, emotionality, the researcher's influence on research. I just acknowledge that. And that's Carolyn Ellis, of course. Interpretive, really linked up, in my view, with performative, often biographical, interrogating historical. I've seen a lot of performances in which many of these same people give narratives about growing up and talking about sexual stereotypes and gender roles that they experienced growing up and different trauma they faced. So hopefully for the betterment of society as they talk about those. And then performative, it can be prose, poetry, visual, music, plays, dance, just really anything, often dialogue, uh, staging, choreography. So it's pretty broad. And as I say, it's more in the communications realm, but it doesn't have to be. I really am a believer in analytic autoethnography and using our experiences to make comments on, broader issues. A guy named Anderson does a pretty good job of making an argument for analytic autoethnography. And there's in 2006, which is getting pretty old now, there's really a classic exchange of articles between Anderson and between Carolyn Ellis and Art Bachner, her husband and writing partner, about analytic versus evocative autoethnography. And that's in our credits here. So if anybody is really interested in pursuing autoethnography further, and especially if you tend more to the analytic, as I do, I'll look at it. I don't see much of Anderson, and I don't see him in the several books I have. So I don't know if he's been kind of moved to the side, or I really don't know. But anyway, he makes a strong argument for analytic rather than evocative. I'm a believer in data analysis and data collection. That's what I've always used. And it can be a lot of different things, notes, memos, agendas, emails. I really like analytic memos in which one makes notes to self and kind of writes all over the place. And I think that's very powerful. Say reflective journals, similar. Of course, in interviews, a lot of autoethnographers are interviewing other people and then using their insights intermixed with the reviewers, the researchers' insights into kind of new phenomenon. And of course, member checking always, if you are interviewing other people, to be sure that you got it right. Ethics is significant. We need to be aware of power issues. Robin Boylorn writing about a small community where she grew up. Carolyn Ellis moved into a community and kind of lived there and gained the confidence of people. And so it's always an issue. What are we doing? Are we comfortable with this? Can we live with the world you've created, Carolyn Ellis? Is there a way to write without hurting other people? And Sophie Thomas says, do no harm. And of course, that's key for standard IRB guidelines. These all is the same thing: respect for persons, beneficence, justice. In addition, process consent. This is Adams, Jones, and Ellis talking about checking in to make sure people are comfortable. Ethics of consequences, understanding the positive and negative consequences of what you might be saying, and then protecting the privacy and identities of participants. And a lot of times people are talking about issues from their childhood or other experiences, or they may not be able to get permission from other people. So it's just, it always concerns me to do that. And so there are different ways to approach that. And so we need to be aware of that. Thomas, and this is from an ethics workshop that I went to in May. We have an imaginary construct that good researchers, great others, a little to us, but she says, even when we're writing about others, we're writing about ourselves. If our sharing our experiences moves others, that is powerful and beautiful. My modeling that for others allows them to do that as well. So she's all for modeling personal experience. Interesting, and this is part of the didactic, the solipsism, narcissism warning. One of the rules here, especially good writing, there are no angels and no villains. You have to humanize people. Often we're writing about people who have harmed us, or a lot of these writers are. People are people. There's no necessarily black and white, good or bad, angels or villains. And she says there's no formula for ethics. And this is a key here, I think, when people are really writing about significant events and experiences. It's troubling. Learn from your experience. Don't devolve into good and bad. If we become so opinionated, then we can't learn and we can't advance our research. I think I gotta hang on. I guess I repeated that first part, but this was just interesting to me. A quote that I wrote down from her: "It should not be emotional pornography, triggering and traumatizing. Don't conflate emotion and evocative stories and meanings. Even though it is emotional, try to get beyond that." So it's just interesting when I'm trying to capture it. I want to write some about this. In this workshop I was in most recently regarding ethics, interesting group of people, mix of people, and people considering what they might write about. An example of cultural issues: a transgender man negotiating new spaces and wondering what to say about that and how to share those experiences. Another guy, a noted scholar, who writes stories of family secrets. And it's a lot of discussion about discovering one's, parents and a relationship with parents. And although it's personal, I think we can all identify with that. Something that came up in my thought is I have a cousin who's a former pastor of an LGBTQ congregation, and she has struggles. And I just think that's fascinating. And I think if I were to work with her in an autoethnography, I think it could be very powerful, and I think it's something that could really be insightful and helpful. But that's up to her to come to that. She's not ready for that yet. So in terms of looking for people and telling their stories, this is from Keith Barry, who has written a book, Bullied, which we'll show at the end. And he's written a lot of other things, but a key book is about bullying, the phenomenon of bullying. He was bullied, but of course it's pretty consistent, sadly, persistent in schools. And he talks about where he's trying to get stories of people who are bullied for his book. And he says, for as long as I can remember, I've been committed to prioritize the care of people who participate in my research, and I feel like I've been successful. Still, craving disturbing stories like these feels dirty. What type of person is well, I think let's miswrite this. What type of person is consumed and gets excited by suffering? Who gets so disappointed when hearing certain good stories are unavailable? What does it mean to want and need to have people's stories? So he was expressing his frustration as he gathered stories of people's bullying to put in his book. And of course, some people were willing to share and some people were not. This is Robin Boylorn, again, writing about her experiences as she was writing about her community growing up, African American community in the South. And she says, while I was confident I could keep participants from being recognized outside the community, I was less sure I could protect their anonymity within the community. And concern always about putting them at risk in the community. So this is, I think this is key to writing and all qualitative research, and especially autoethnography. She just says collapsing characters so their likeness, action, and experience would be indistinguishable using pseudonyms, fictionalization, and remember Denson mentioned fiction earlier as a tactic of storytelling. So you put things together, you disguise the lives, experiences, and it can become fiction. In fact, I remember when I was writing something and I was having a person read it over who had been there, and she said, well, that's not exactly what happened. And I said, well, okay, that's true, but the broader picture is true. And you just need to mask people because you don't want to harm anybody. Tony Adams says sharing autoethnography does require thinking about audiences. Some of this can be pretty graphic, and I'm not sharing some of the more graphic stuff here because it's not the audience for that. But even Tony Adams, who can be pretty intense, thinks about the different, as we know, different audiences for different things. So what I'd like to do is I wanted to show some examples of things that some of these people have written, and linguistically, they're all semantically, they're all a little different, and so I just thought it was worth showing how things can be. Things can be art forms as well as research. So again, Robin Boylorn is writing about well, race, class, and gender in a small southern, in this case, in a small southern town where she grew up. But she's talking about just kind of a generalization, a metaphor of the stereotypes of a Black woman. Everything coming together. What does it mean to be an African American woman? Cultural enigma, parading dual identities at once, challenging the notions of class, race, sexual stereotypes. Financially disadvantaged, even when she makes a good living because she's often the breadwinner. She's the mammy figure, the supra-human Christian hard worker, dark-skinned, ever-smiling, diligent, doting, self-sacrificing, self-supporting, rebellious, too domineering, too strong, too outspoken. And then it's interesting to me, as once an English teacher, always an English teacher, she switches from third person to second person, talking directly to the reader, which is more powerful. You overlook her when she's serving food, cleaning rooms, struggling to get by. You don't pay attention to her when she's the only one in the room, the only damn one. You see her smiling on the outside, dying on the inside, but you can't tell the difference. She stands on invisible pedestals that set her up to fail. So anyway, so then in this piece, Boylorn goes on to examine these stereotypes and metaphors and how she saw them play out in her life and what she feels like it means to the image of the African American woman. And pretty powerful. Here's another piece by Tony Adams. I heard him deliver this several years ago at a conference, and it just struck me. He was talking, so he's gay, okay, he came out of the closet, and he writes a lot about that. And this is, and my purpose is not to shock or anybody. I'm just trying to give examples of things that are evocative. So he writes in the second person again here. He's not writing in first person. He's writing in second person, which is very powerful. And to me, it made more of an impact because he's talking to he's talking to the reader, but he's talking to his characters out there. And this is just the abstract. In this essay, you describe harms you committed, and he's talking about himself, before recognizing and accepting disclosing. You write to identify and challenge societal norms regarding gender. You hope that readers will consider the ways that they too have harmed others and how they, like you, try to find ease living with themselves. So he's thinking out loud, and I just think the use of the second person is especially powerful. And this is a good example of examining poignant experiences in his life that he, I don't know, maybe people can identify with, either being the bullied, the bully, or the bullied. And he was both. He talks about Wayne, the relentless high school bully. And again, he's writing about himself, but he's making himself a separate character, which I just think is powerful. Sometimes Wayne would push you into walls. Sometimes he'd steal your books. Sometimes he'd make fun of you for being fat. You celebrated learning that Wayne decided to quit school. And then other poignant stories, he continues in second person. And then there was Sarah, the smart and sweet girl with whom you took many classes. Although you were overweight, Sarah weighed more. There's a shameful admission. You used to tease her about her weight, stare at her size, call her terrible names, and so on. She probably hated school too. And then, perhaps most poignant, in addition to teasing Sarah, you also remember teasing a boy in high school for being shy, effeminate, another boy for being soft-spoken and flamboyant. You remember another boy regularly teased for being queer, not by you, but you never defended him, who killed himself during his first year of high school. You believe that the incessant teasing contributed to the decision to die. And so these are very powerful images. They're specific to him, but probably many people can identify with some aspects of this kind of bullying in high school. And to me, linguistically, semantically, he makes it more powerful by writing to himself using second person. Ron Pelias is another, just retired from Southern Illinois University. I heard this presentation actually in May. And he read this, and again, my purpose is not to defend any, or to offend anyone or defend anyone. I just thought that the way it's written semantically is very powerful. Again, he's using first and second person, but notice how he objectifies people who are very personal to him. He objectifies grandson. He objectifies, well, I'm assuming his daughter or his son. It's not clear here, but it's political. So again, I'm not intending to offend anybody, but I thought it was powerful. And I guess I should tell you about the time I walked through the front door of the home of my one-year-old grandson and was greeted as soon as I entered, a hat, a Make America Great Again hat, right there on the coat rack, insisting that I don't forget the kind of place I'm going in, telling me to proceed with caution, reminding me to watch what I might say. And also, I might note that these are connected by commas. There are no periods here. It's almost a stream of consciousness, which the effect of that is just the powerful overall image. Again, autoethnography is about writing. But despite the warning, I found myself arguing with my grandson's father, going back and forth, going on and on until hours passed. My grandson's mother, who sat there holding my grandson's father's hand and who said nothing during the exchange, excused herself, went to bed. And I just was struck by the fact that he objectifies people who are so important to him. My grandson, no name. My grandson's father's head. Again, using the hat as a central image, as if those on my grandfather's head, like it probably goes when he goes to work and talks with his coworkers about the snowflakes and how they all should be locked up with Hillary so that they wouldn't be in Trump's way. So again, this was a linguistic nuance that struck me. And so I guess the moral of this story is that things that are very personal can become even more powerful by things as simple as using second person, third person, and metaphor. Okay. These are some personal. I've gone pretty fast here, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to get through that. Are there any questions, Armando? Does anybody want to say anything at this point?
Give me 1 second.
This is Patricia.
Patricia,
This is
how are
Patricia
you?
Koji.
Yeah, hi.
I have a hi, Jim. Thank you so much for covering the qualities of autoethnographic design. It's a great presentation. I have 2 questions for you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. I'm just concerned about the
Okay.
question.
I have two questions. How do you reduce personal bias, if that is even possible? You know, how do you go about reducing personal bias from this kind of study?
I think they would say that you don't, that you acknowledge it. I think it's important to acknowledge it. In fact, in this piece that I
Okay.
just read by Ron Pelias, sorry, this is part of a larger piece in which he's talking about he's not a fan of the president, okay, and so you might pick that up, but it's part of a larger piece in which he's walking on campus and he's seeing people wear T-shirts and hats that bother him, and he wonders how to do that. And so I think he acknowledges his bias right up front, and he kind of wears it on his sleeve. And sometimes that bothers me, that some of these people are really political and really evocative. But I think it's important to say. I think it's important to say that if we talk about this. I don't think that minimizes the impact of this, and I think many people can identify with the message. So I think you need to acknowledge that it's your bias, and just say it's there. You also didn't change your battery on your smoke detector, did you?
Okay. My other question is,
Yeah.
what is the probability of University of Phoenix IRB approving an autoethnographic study or design for a student as a doctoral dissertation?
No, zero
Do you
chance.
think?
No, zero. They won't. No, they won't. They've said that. And I understand that.
Yeah.
No, so they need to go to phenomenology or narrative inquiry or case study. Some of those other broader
Okay.
fields. I agree with that.
Even phenomenology
Okay.
is listed in the new dissertation guide.
It is, right? Phenomenology is listed, isn't that right? Or is that correct, Armando?
Right. They caution you not to go into phenomenology as well. Just in certain cases, perhaps, but it's not the preferred method.
Yeah.
So you can go to the SAS web. You can find that there is a new guide that you can go ahead and see what is the recommended and supported methodologies if you want.
And I'm okay with that. I understand that. I mean, like my dissertation was narrative inquiry and autoethnography, but I did a lot of narrative analysis of just piles of documents and notes and memos and everything. So, I feel like I got a pretty good understanding of data analysis. In fact, one of my advisors would not let me just be evocative and spout off and everything. So so I agree with that. Phenomenology is the same because it is pretty easy to be biased and it's pretty easy to be narcissistic. So I would say learn the methodology through case study or narrative inquiry, and then go forth and be evocative after you get your degree. Because plenty of people will welcome you. And as you know, Patricia, in that qualitative conference, are happy to have you.
Yes. Yes.
So,
okay. Thank you so much.
Put a link.
Yeah.
I put a link on the chat. You can go ahead and grab the new doctoral guide. This is the latest and greatest page of the doctoral studies. Goes along with the new TK20, the new model that we're going to. On the right-hand side, Tool for Success, you find the College of Doctoral Studies Dissertation Guide, okay?
Good. And I wanted to mention, I just read pieces by Tony Adams and Ron Pelias. As I said, they had read things in other presentations that struck me, and so that they just stayed with me, And I think that's an example of something that's powerful if it stays with you and you keep revisiting it. Anyway, I couldn't find this thing by Tony Adams. I couldn't find it. I looked and looked. I couldn't find it if it was published. So I wrote him an email, and I wrote Ron Pelias an email for copies of what they had done. And within an hour, each of those guys got back to me. And I thought, my God, I mean, these guys are, they're pretty renowned in this field, and I'm like nobody. So I just thought that really spoke to the humanity of them. And so I made two good contacts, right? So anyway, these are some specific applications that I'm thinking about since this is a personal presentation. And I think this gives an idea of how one can use autoethnography. So I took a long time to get to finish my dissertation. I was pretty much classic. I don't think you could have any of you could not have any other student who is uh, probably took longer than I. But I was finally successful, and a lot of reasons for that. But anyway, I think one of my professors who was very helpful to me at the end, I told her that I would like to write a collaborative autoethnography with her, and she agreed. So I think we're going to produce a collaborative autoethnography on the pursuit of the dissertation. And there are a lot of articles out there on that, but I think it'll be pretty powerful because I went through a lot of stuff, and these are just comments that this professor had written to me early on. We weren't always friends. And one comment, this is from an email, I think the universe is telling you something, Jim, which is basically maybe you shouldn't be doing this. And then think about the goals, write them down. So anyway, I think I'm going to have a collaborative autoethnography with one of my professors who's actually pretty widely published. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I call that, of course, Lazarus Come Forth, which is being raised from the dead. So if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. Here's another thing that I think is going to be published before the end of the year. It's a collection of essays on lifelong learning, and it's called I Am What I Become is the book, and just an example of something that I've written, stuff that goes through my head, things that I confront using my personal experience. I'm a white male, former middle school principal, ensconced in the American middle class. I know my role group generically has been privileged in American culture. I know my perceptions are filtered through this prism. However, I believe that as individuals, we endure our unique traumas, and the reflection on our resolution of these ordeals can help us empathize with challenges faced by those in other groups whom we serve. So continuing this issue of this kind of white privilege, white male privilege, which, there it is, right out there. And I know it's a key issue in culture. This is from something that I wrote in a workshop at ICQI a couple of years ago. Chris Poulos writes a lot about family history, and I just wrote this in the workshop. And I've corresponded with him and talked to him several times about an article out of this. South Georgia, 1927. My paternal grandfather was shot and killed in a drunken argument outside a bar. The man who shot him was married to his aunt, his father's sister. His father, my great-grandfather, arranged with local authorities for the killer to take his wife and family and leave town, banished, never to return. He said that if the man went to jail, he would be obligated to care for his sister and her children. He did not, he said, need more mouths to feed. It's a great story that I need to tell. A few years ago, a family friend who was a nurse in a VA hospital in Augusta was caring for a patient who asked where she was from. When she told him, he said, I killed a man there once. So one of my goals here is to write the story. This is another piece from this I Am What I Become. My heritage is rooted in the Deep South, predates the Confederacy. A few years ago, my wife, an Illinois native, and I visited a family cemetery hidden in the Georgia woods. The ancestors were Confederate States of America veterans. The iron CSA insignia attached to the tombstones. So the question, did they fight for slavery? I don't know. The culture would tell you they fought for their homeland and for their honor as they perceived it. The Confederate graves again. They've shaped my role as prominent to this discussion. Seeker, learner, adventurer, all are part of the tapestry, the mélange of my journey, past, present, and future. And this is an example of crosses that are on Confederate graves. Confederate States of America. So I had never seen anything like that before. And do I carry guilt from that? Do I carry responsibility for that? It's there. I can't deny it. I don't know. And I think it's a story that obviously is prominent in the culture, and it's something that I hope to explore. And I think that I can use autoethnography as a way to take a specific issue for me and extend it to a broader conversation. And so, almost done here, by the way. During a recent workshop in narrative analysis at ICQI, we had an assignment. This is our visual narrative. With a partner, they said, go out in the hallway and take pictures that tell a story. I don't know anyone. I turned to the person next to me, Min, that's not his real name, a Korean doc student attending a prestigious university in the American Southeast. I asked him if he'd like to join me, and he says, sure. But we don't know what we want to do with our assignment, so I asked him about his experiences in the US. He's been here for 6 months. He says what has surprised him most is Southern whites' sense of hegemony, of superiority, of privilege. He says people are nice to him, but there it is, nonetheless. We walk outside, and immediately I see a portrait of Abe Lincoln on the wall. We are in the land of Lincoln, after all. At the University of Illinois in this conference, we're enmeshed in an island of radical, liberal progressivism, surrounded by fields of soybeans, corn, cattle, and conservative loyalists. I ask him what he thinks that Lincoln would say about all that, the irony of it all. I ask him how it relates to his thoughts of hegemony. He doesn't know. He's heard of Abe Lincoln, of course, but I wonder if the cultural anomalies are too much for him to process. We walk downstairs to the breakout room where they're selling books, many by presenters at the conference. Min talks to some of the sellers. They're diverse, African Americans, Asians, a woman wearing a hijab, anomalies in the midst of the fields. Min doesn't notice. He's asking about buying some books. I see behind him portraits of university patriarchs, all white men, hegemony again. I take another photo. We return to the workshop. We briefly discuss our thoughts, but time short, too short to talk of Lincoln, white hegemony, and a liberal island enmeshed within an arch conservative sea. Min and I exchange email addresses and agree to follow up. So there he is. And I'm sorry I don't have a better way of masking him, but I couldn't figure it out. So I just put that there. And I do have his email, so I'm going to be in touch with him to see if he wants to write something together. But there he is next to Abe. And, I just thought it was an interesting irony. And then, again, we have him, it's just in a room where you have the dead white guys on the wall. And I just thought it was an interesting juxtaposition with his observations that he had made with just a few years and a few months in the States. So these are some key books. Some of these are from the presentation from last time, but still good. Handbook of Autoethnography. And if you look here, you can see the people we've quoted: Holman Jones, Stacey Adams, Carolyn Ellis. Evocative Autoethnography by Carolyn and Art Bachner. Autoethnography is Method, which is a really good book, by the way, to start. It gives really kind of covers the gamut, and I would highly recommend that. Interpretive Autoethnography from Denson. Again, Denson in his old age is really going to the left here, but you can get he's the godfather of all this stuff. So it's good. It's a short read. It's a good one to have. Accidental Ethnography is Chris Poulos. He writes about family history and so on. So these are just some good books. Here's Critical Autoethnography by Robin Boylorn and Bully by Keith Berry. So final thoughts. A poem, always have to end on a poem. If you've taken this rubble for my past, raking through it for fragments you could sell, know that I long ago moved on deeper into the heart of the matter. If you think you can grasp me, think again. My story flows in more than one direction, a delta springing from the riverbed with its 5 fingers spread. That poem is Delta by Adrian Rich. And that's just a picture of me 2 years ago with Carolyn Ellis and Art Bachner. So references. And you can find us on the Research Methodology group. And there we are. What's your story? We have time left. I apologize for going fast, but I figure we can catch up now. Questions, thoughts, stories to tell. What do you want to write about?
I maybe just have a dumb question, right? What is the difference between autoethnography and just being a regular reporter, journalist?
Yeah, I think it's personal. Yeah, I think it's analysis. I think it's personal, really digging into your own personal experiences and applying them. It's more personal. I'd say it's more personal than being a reporter. Okay. And you know what, Armando, I see when I see a lot of commentary out today, I do see a lot of similarities. So I would agree with you. There are similarities. I think the autoethnography is more poignant. I think it's more personal. It's digging into more personal reflection, admitting your bias, and then trying to do that for a greater good. So I think it's a great question. I don't know if I have a great answer.
Because I've seen a lot of journalists now becoming autoethnographers by themselves, right? So
yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
Okay.
Jim, can you hear me? This is Liz.
Liz.
Hi. I enjoyed that tremendously, and I could comment a little bit on the value of observation. You know, that these stories that you're gathering and thinking about, in a sense, you're observing human nature very closely. And trying to create a record that may be greatly valued at some point. And I always remember, in fact, I used to say this to students, that in the hard sciences, physics and math, they spend hundreds of years observing, just observing phenomena, and then developing frameworks for understanding that phenomena. So in a way, you know, when we started working in the social sciences, we wanted to adapt those that methodology immediately before going through this process of observation, which is what I think you're talking about. And understanding, you know, how do people talk to themselves? You know, how do people portray their position in the world? You know, what are all these social forces that surround us and shape the way we feel about ourselves and about everyone around us. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed hearing this.
You're so articulate. It's always so good to hear you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks.
But I think that's right. I think and that's why I wanted to share three examples that I think are poignant. One, a guy coming out of the closet and being bullied throughout his young life. An older man concerned about the political culture, and his grandson growing up in an environment that bothers him tremendously. And the way they both wrote about that, that is personal. I think it's different from being a reporter because it's very personal, and yet they're taking their personal experiences, and to be honest, I could identify with it, with the Ron Pelias piece, and it really spoke to me.
Go ahead. I'm interrupting her. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Even the reporter, though, even the gathering of the news and analysis of the news, it is a form of research. It's low-level research, but you know, a lot depends on their credibility. How do they develop credibility for the news that they're sharing? You know, how transparent is it? You know, what about the analysis? What are the assumptions when you see news analysis? You know, they're following a process of reasoning. So journalism, I think, is really very important in terms of, it's not research per se, but it's a form of developing a story, and a story that's based on the facts, hopefully. So I don't know.
But remember, Liz, one of the characteristics of research is the non-bias. We go any length in quantitative analysis to try to don't be biased. It's an extensive sections on dissertations on how to test for the validity, reliability, trustworthiness on the qualitative data.
Oh, no, absolutely. Although I will say, Armando, that even the tests for the reliability, validity, the underlying assumptions, I mean, we only just recently realized that testing drugs on a 100% male population may not give us the most the most accurate estimates of how those drugs are going to work on women. So we're blind in so many ways. I couldn't agree with you more. We're kind of wandering around within a cloud of our own assumptions and delusions. So I could not agree with you more. And reporting is not research. But it is a low-level form of finding information and then presenting it. So
No. It is research, but the point I'm making
in
is
that sense, yes.
research.
Go ahead.
But you got to be cautious in not to inject your own bias, because suddenly you're tainting the sample. So what the story is no longer, the story that you want to tell, but it's actually your own bias injected
Right,
into the
it's
sample.
your story.
That's my
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, no, I think that's correct.
And we don't want war stories, but just let's go to a personal. This is bias. You do admit your bias. Forget the positivistic. Forget the objectivity. But I think an example is me probing the aspect of white supremacy, which we know is prominent in our culture, and Confederate graves, and my history, which goes way back past the Confederacy, and slavery, and all of that stuff. And as I wrestle with those issues, there are dilemmas. There should be epiphanies. And how can I share that to a larger group? Can I write a news article about that? Sure. But this is it is a particular methodology, and it is a particular focus. And with that, I mean, I would include a broader discussion of what other people have said about that issue. So anyway, I mean, you can go on and on about it, but.
No, I get excited. Sorry, I'll stop talking after this. Yeah, one of the best ways to be transparent is to say who you are. What's your perspective on this? What is your point of view? And then your discussion and your argument is much easier to understand and to interpret. So that's what you're doing, Jim, I think, with your Confederate ancestors and
as Liz knows, this is how I work out things, is just kind of to talk through them. And as we talk, we figure it out. And that is another element of autoethnography, the dialogic piece of going back and forth, in and out, probing to say, what exactly is it that we mean? So anybody else out there? I can't see anything, so. Patricia, are you still there? Don't know.
I'm still here. I'm kind of taking in everything. I think I had a lot of this during the conference we attended.
Yeah.
But sometimes I get confused about, why don't you just do a historical study?
Well, there you go.
And,
there's a lot of
and that becomes a study.
Yeah.
And then you can put your reflection at the end of the historical study. If you do an historical study, what do you think will be taken away from it?
I ask your question again. I didn't understand your question. What would I learn?
For example, you shared some of your reflection on what you are writing on.
Right.
If you make it historical, what do you think you'll be lacking from it? If it's not, if it's a historical study, what do you think will be lacking? Just kind of curious.
Just a personal. I mean, I think it'd be a personal interaction. I mean, this is very personal. It's very evocative. It's very emotional, and you're really sharing those emotions as you go. The dilemmas, I mean, I imagine there are people who would say, if you looked at those Confederate graves that are in the middle of the Georgia woods, should go in and torch them, because they're symbols of racism and bigotry and all of that stuff. But I'm not sure they are, and that itself is a controversial statement. And I would just, you know, and that's an ethical dilemma for me, right? And so I think in a separate, I mean, the historical would be involved. And when I, you know, I want to write this, and I want to involve, I want to intertwine the history with the personal interaction. And so it becomes autobiographical, oral history, uh, all of those things merge, and you're not going to find clear lines here. It's not going to be, it gets kind of messy. In fact, I think I left out a quote. I had too much stuff here, but it gets messy. It's not tidy. But hopefully, one gains insight. Kind of the bottom line is one uses one's experiences, one's insights, one's dilemmas to gain, to share with other people, that other people can learn from those, and you know, gain greater insight onto the problem. And I think we see that with Robin Boylorn in writing about African American women and her growing up in that environment, and examining those cultural stereotypes of Black women in America. And so that's that. Do we have anybody else?
Okay, with the top of the hour.
With time, maybe 10 years from now, we now see this as a real study, you know. It always starts from somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Like you said, what's your story?
Yeah, oral history is closely linked to this, and you know, Franklin and Connolly do a lot with that, and oh, some other folks that I don't have on the tip of my tongue, but we're at the end of the show. But so it is closely related. The autoethnography is really mixing oneself up within that, making oneself a part of the story, which of course is not quantitative. It's very, very qualitative. And
Yeah.
you know, and of course phenomenology, you know, kind of hinges on that as well. So anyway, I think there's a lot of power in people talking about their own personal experiences and what other people can learn from it. I mean, I just like the last thing is people are cancer survivors. Okay. The way that it can really change your life, like I'm a cancer survivor, and writing about that can be quite poignant. It can be very personal, and yet I think that other people can learn from that in a way that you can't learn from broad studies. You know, sometimes I think physicians could do well to listen to some qualitative autoethnographic accounts of the way that this kind of stuff changes one's life. So anyway, I didn't put that in, but that would be another example. All right.
Thank you so much.
James,
I really enjoyed it.
We are at the top of the hour. I'm going to stop the recording. So it's 7 minutes past the hour.
I have
any
minutes.
last questions before I stop?
All right.
Any last question before I stop? Okay, stopping now.